So I think we saw enough volume in the range of 20% plus of customers that we felt like could be interested in this, whether it was now or down the road. That gave us enough confidence to move forward. And I actually think that putting something out for the consumer to react to that you have strong conviction and data around gives you that better validation, because it's requiring consumers to actually spend and not just project on, hey, would I do, right? I would be interested. And that's where you get some of the most compelling data.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today I have Meredith English joining us. And Meredith, you have an interesting Cubicle to CEO story because you actually used to work at Crocs. So I'm going to say it's more of your Crocs to CEO story. Do you want to share with us what that catalyst was that led you to entrepreneurship?
Definitely. So as you said, I spent a good bulk of my career actually within the Crocs ecosystem. I started my career as a management consultant specializing in retail and consumer products. I then joined Crocs and worked on a number of different phases through the company. So first on its turnaround strategy, and then with a number of operational roles. Within Crocs, I ran our Jibbitz Charms business, and that was almost a startup within Crocs. So was a part of the business and a way to personalize your Crocs, if you're familiar with the charms that bedazzle a number of Crocs shoes. Yeah, so I think that was a little bit of an entrepreneurial journey within Crocs, certainly. And in between some stints at Crocs, I actually spent some time working for and with earlier stage, more entrepreneurial-led companies. So Daily Harvest, Tula, which is a direct-to-consumer skincare company, Oatly, the oat milk company that was smaller at the time. So it was great to be able to do some of that work. And then when I was thinking about different opportunities, I was introduced to Fracture, which had been a growing company for a number of years, was started in 2009 by University of Florida graduates, and instantly saw how wonderful the product was and how we just needed to get it out into more people's hands. So they were looking for a new CEO to kind of take the reins and bring the company to another phase of growth. So I was fortunate enough to help it on this next step of its entrepreneurial journey.
That's incredible. Well, you're a legend, first of all. Like so many of those brands we know and love and recognize. And yes, I do remember the charms that you can dazzle your Crocs with. They were all the rage in middle school and still are now. And so it's exciting to see, what you've contributed to just these legendary brands and now what you're bringing to Fracture. So just for listeners who are not familiar with the company, with Fracture, I'm just going to read a quick description of the products they make. So Fracture manufactures gorgeous premium glass prints that have traditionally only had a modern frameless aesthetic. And you guys know from consumer feedback that there is both an existing customer that loves that look as well as those who do like that more traditional frame look. And I see a beautiful framed, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a beautiful frame piece, yes, behind Meredith on screen. And so that kind of leads into our case study today, which is all about how Fracture was able to sell an add-on, these frames for their products that increased customer conversions and specifically first-time customer conversions and the average order value. So we'll get into all of the data, but I wanted to start with, how did you become aware that this was even a problem that your customers had? Can you share a little bit more about how you kind of arrived at this conclusion that this add-on was necessary?
Absolutely. So I think, again, the company had lived for close to 15 years, really with just that frameless aesthetic, which is gorgeous, modern. I have some of it in my home, even though I have the framed one behind me. And we knew there was a consumer that loved it, but we had a hypothesis that there was a consumer that wasn't purchasing, or even some of our existing purchasers who wanted frames. And that was validated through some consumer interviews and research. It was seen in a lot of comments on social, especially when we did paid advertising from both new or considering consumers as well as existing consumers of, oh gosh, I wish you offered frames, love the product, incredible quality, vibrant color, all of those great things, but wanting that. And we knew, right, even as we kind of looked at benchmark across other brands in the home decor category, that frames have been a thing for a reason. So I think that gave us the confidence to be able to move forward and really test, which test and learn is a lot of what you do as an early stage or growth stage company.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I am wondering how long it took from when you kind of came on board, or what volume perhaps of these inbound customer inquiries or things that you noticed your customers were saying before you decided it's time for us to actually, bring this to fruition. Because I feel like there's a lot of times as business owners that we get feedback or commentary from our community. And while we value all of them, sometimes it's not the right move to try to accommodate every request. So what kind of benchmark, if you will, were you looking for in terms of volume or length of time before you were like, this is a move that needs to happen?
Absolutely. So the lucky thing for me, by the time I came on board, the broader team had been hearing this for consumers for quite some time. There was quite a bit of surveying and testing done. So I think that gave enough data and confidence to start to move forward. And I think some of these things, you don't know completely. And there are definitely things where you take your cues from the consumer and put something into the market and it flops, right? So I think we saw enough volume, in the range of 20% plus of customers that we felt like could be interested in this, whether it was now or down the road. That gave us enough confidence to move forward. And you can kind of sit and model that out continuously, right? But some of it is just testing appetite by actually putting it out there. And again, having started my career as a management consultant, I've done a ton of consumer interviews and surveying. And I actually think that putting something out for the consumer to react to that you have strong conviction and data around gives you that better validation, because it's requiring consumers to actually spend and not just project on, hey, what would I do, right? I would be interested. And that's where you get some of the most compelling data. It's risky, but so I think it's good to think about, hey, how do I de-risk and have this be something that can start small? We can get some validation and grow without having to put crazy resources and investment behind it. And I think that was another great thing that the team was able to do. We manufacture all of our frames and assemble them in-house. There are others that buy them prefabricated from elsewhere, and we have such an incredible head of manufacturing that he was able to create that process with very little investment, which also gave us, I think, confidence to be able to move forward with a more scaled test.
That's incredible. And I think that you brought up such a great point about market validation and having purchasing power really be the leader of that. Because to your point, yeah, people can voice their opinions all day, but it doesn't really matter unless they put their money where their mouth is. Because your team, is able to create and manufacture everything in-house, I'm wondering, did you even go the pre-order route at all, or was it just not necessary based on the manufacturing logistics?
So there were samples received from someone who did it prefabricated. Again, our head of manufacturing is so fantastic. He has a really high bar for quality. And he got them and he was like, hey, they're good, they're not great. I think we could actually do this better ourselves. And again, I think that let us do something where we didn't have to buy a crazy amount of prefabricated finished goods inventory, right? We could really test into a space and learn. So, there was a little bit of serendipity to that, of him being like, hey, the quality is not up to my snuff. But I think it led to a really great opportunity for us.
Absolutely. And I'm going to insert an early hot take moment for you. And I wanted to ask this because I'm sure this has been I don't know if challenge is the right word, or debate, or just inner monologue with a lot of business owners. The genesis of Fracture, right? When I was reading on your website, kind of reading the about story of how this all came to be, the genesis of this company is the innovation of a no frame photo print. That's what is your unique market positioning, right? So did it seem at any point internally with discussions counterintuitive or disruptive to your brand positioning to bring frames into the picture, even though you knew there was a segment of your audience, like you said, 20% plus, that would be a good fit for this? And if there was, can you walk us through how you kind of thought through that dilemma, if you will? Because again, I know there's listeners out there who maybe have a unique brand positioning for their business, and then they're thinking of adding something that almost seems counterintuitive to that. And how do they overcome that mental block?
Absolutely. And it's hard to shed where you've come from. And in my early couple of days, even taking this role, I did spend a good amount of time with Abhi Lokesh, who is the founder and former CEO. He's still on our board of Fracture. And him and his co-founder really started the company with that modern frameless aesthetic, as you said, and really wanted a better way to print photos. So living in a digital world, how do you bring more of that into the analog space? And landed on Fracture with that innovation. So I think it's the frameless aesthetic, but it's also the vibrancy of the color, the really great way to sustainably manufacture by printing directly on glass. So I think what you see is that frameless aesthetic, especially on our website, but when you get the product in hand, you appreciate all of that manufacturing goodness that renders a really beautiful image. So it didn't feel false or like we were moving away from that, because it felt like, hey, we're still offering that to the consumer at their baseline, but giving them an option. Right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I would say to think about just in terms of consumer, and it's one of the reasons to love consumer businesses, is the consumer is always changing what they want, right? And moving where their demand is. So again, because I came from the footwear space, there was a long period of time that no one wanted to buy flats anymore, and it was all sneakers, and flats have kind of started to sneak back in again, right? So if you kind of built a company in that period where flats were out and you were like, hey, we've got some great casual sneakers or twin gore upper type shoes, and then weren't open to that new silhouette, you could leave a lot of money on the table, to kind of give a, maybe industry allegory.
No, that's actually really helpful, staying adaptable to consumer interests. And I mean, we've seen that time and time again from giants in the business space, right? That have gone out of business like a Blockbuster because they did not keep up with the changing consumer interest or demand and whatnot. So then when you launched this in mid-April of last year, I believe, right? You launched these frames for the first time, and you launched with 3 colorway options, so black, white, and maple. Did you collect customer input on the actual color choices that you guys launched with before putting it out there, or did you just go straight to launch to kind of test these 3 colorways?
Great question. So we didn't do a lot of direct consumer feedback gathering. I think what we did, which is, merchandising best practice, is really look at the market, bestsellers, and assortment as we looked at other framing companies, some that are direct competitors, but some that are just in the broader decor space, to kind of use that as a good benchmark and proxy, which I think there's great data about there to inform you about that, and said, hey, we're going to start small with a very limited assortment. And so if we have kind of good conviction from that merchandising led data, then we can kind of validate after. And, it's always surprising to see what's the best seller as you launch kind of a new category, vertical, etc. And that's where I think some of the in-depth learning comes from. Again, because everything that we do is made to order, unlike other businesses where you have to manufacture something that's a fully finished good, we have a lot less risk. And I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about our business model.
Absolutely. I mean, the unit economics, I'm sure, are just so much stronger with that level of customization. Were you personally surprised by the most popular color out of the assortment of 3?
I won't tell you exactly what it is, but I was a little bit surprised, truthfully. And I think that comes from even what I have kind of decor preferences myself around. And that's why I always think it's good and a merchandising best practice to follow the consumer, to follow the assortment trends, because if you kind of put what you like on things, you usually miss the mark of just what the general consumer wants, right?
Yes. Such a tough lesson to learn that you are not always your consumer, especially when it comes to branding or anything in that aesthetic space. It's so easy to project our own taste onto our community. And I think that's actually the hardest lesson. Even I've had to unlearn we don't manufacture obviously physical products here at Cubicle to CEO, but even just in the branding process, kind of having to learn, oh, maybe that's a color I wouldn't naturally gravitate towards myself in our branding, but it speaks to our community because of, color psychology or different things like that. So excellent reminder there. When you launched in mid-April, are you able to walk us through the behind the scenes of actual launch week, like your marketing strategy around that? What channels did you use across email, social, PR, PR ads, all of the above, only a few? And what were you really trying to target to really drive the most sales in that first week or this new collection?
Absolutely. And to take a step back, if you think about mid-April as a time period, Mother's Day, which is a huge gifting in the custom space and photo space milestone, was kind of hot on the heels of the launch. So I think it was great to launch for Mother's Day, but it definitely meant, hey, we've got a truncated experience to kind of launch and start talking about frames.
Right.
So I think we kind of kept a pretty simple strategy for the launch of frames themselves. It was a lot through our own organic channels of email, SMS, organic social to reach out to our existing consumers, which one of the great things about Fracture is also what a loyal customer base we have, how strong our retention is, and folks who come back and buy from us again and again. And we said, hey, we know you've bought frameless from us, but there definitely was opportunity for people to come back and buy frames for their existing prints or have a new reason to come back and buy, whether it was for themselves or someone in their life that they knew might want frames, right? So that was definitely part of the strategy. And then we used some of our paid channels, right? As you think about Google paid search, a lot of our spend goes into Meta. So if we think about Facebook and Instagram, right? And messaging that, hey, Fracture is now in the business of frames. So kept it pretty simple at launch. And what I would say is we're kind of on a journey as a growth stage company to up the number of channels that we're in, to increase kind of our PR when we do some major launches. We have one coming up that I can't speak too much about, but we've got more PR for then. But we definitely kind of took a very simple approach, just knowing, hey, we'll get some really good data through this big consumer moment that's coming up. And let's talk to our existing consumers and then use kind of this simple strategy to start to validate with some of the new, especially with something that was newer for us as a brand.
And was that tie into Mother's Day, if you will, and that big gifting opportunity, like you mentioned, was that an intentional decision of why you launched or chose to launch in mid-April with this? Or was that kind of almost an afterthought and just kind of happenstance where you're like, oh, it just perfectly kind of ties into the upcoming holiday?
Yeah, great question. So I think the team definitely said, hey, we want this for Mother's Day, right? Because we know that that's a high volume period. We know that, again, there may be the gift giver who thinks that that framed aesthetic is better for their gift recipient. So I think it was thoughtful in the sense of, hey, it would be great to have in advance of Mother's Day. But with things that you're building like this from scratch internally, some of the timing of that can be difficult. So I think the team was happy to be able to pull it off, right? But was hard certainly to get there operationally.
Right. And did you launch with any sort of special incentives, promotions, discounts? I know that's a strategy some businesses use. Others are like, we try to stay away from that as much as possible with the new product. What was your thesis on that?
So we didn't offer any kind of deep discount initially for frames. We really launched it as a new reason for the consumer to be interested and have a purchase occasion with us. Again, knowing that we were going to go into a promotional period where we would have some site-wide compelling discounts to convert certain consumers, we said, hey, let's just put out some really great content to drive traffic and see what it looks in more of an evergreen period before we then offer it up again as that complementary product that would be eligible for discounts as we got into that key consumer moment.
Can you expand on an example of great content that you felt like really helped people see the value of this addition? Any standout content pieces from that time period that come to mind?
Yeah, definitely. So at the time we started to do more within the influencer UGC space. We actually had a few mom influencers that worked with us in advance of Mother's Day and had a number of them buy into frames and kind of do some storytelling around that. So I think that was one content play. And then did some video where you could kind of up close see both the quality of our Fracture prints, but the frames themselves, which I think is really compelling. As you know, when you buy things online, you can be served ads and you can be a little unclear about the quality, right? So having a testimonial element, I think, is really strong. And then using different filming techniques to be able to try to convey that level of quality to the consumer are kind of two ways around it, right? So I think that's been powerful for us.
Actually, your comment there kind of just sparked another question for me. You mentioned, working with these influencers and mom creators in specific, and kind of getting this product into their hands ahead of time so they can create these testimonials and these content pieces for you. Did you test at all, either with this particular launch or maybe any past launches, where you actually allowed early access to the product for returning customers and sold to them before you put it out to your full list or on your website?
We did not for frames, but it is part of our plan. I have to give credit to our VP of marketing for that. It is going to be something that will happen for an upcoming launch, which I'm super excited about.
Ooh, exciting. Okay. That's good to know. I'm glad that's kind of something that, you're building upon then for future launches. But regardless, this one was very, very successful. You had a very impressive results. Most notably, I think from what you had submitted prior to this interview, these two stood out to me. You had a 15 to 20% increase in your average order value, or AOV for short, if you guys hear that throughout the rest of this episode. And you mentioned in your form submission that this actually changed your unit economics and made customer acquisition more profitable. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So as we looked kind of year over year, and it's a trend that we've continued to see every single month since the launch of frames, we have increased that average order value by at least 15 to 20%. And we've seen that for both new and existing customers.
Wow.
And we've seen strong attachment rate of frames, so anywhere from 12 to 15% within either of those cohorts. A little bit higher for new customers, which gives us good data that, hey, this is bringing in a consumer that maybe was hesitant to convert without those traditional frames. So the way that it's changed our unit economics is we as a business, because we're focused on profitability, I think we had a lot of D2C companies that were able to just pay for growth for a long time. We're profitable, actually, and we're super proud of that. And we like to thoughtfully fund our growth. So we do think a lot about first order profitability. So by that, thinking about your cost of acquisition for a given consumer, and then when they do convert, what does that first purchase really look like as we think about our return on ad spend. So because that AOV was that 15 to 20% higher, especially for new consumers, that allowed us to spend more at a similar or higher level of return and actually continue to start to scale some of our marketing channels more. I think it's really important in this current environment. I've been hearing from a lot of other direct-to-consumer brands and CEOs, and I don't think this should be surprising to anybody, but right now the consumer is under pressure. There's a lot of competition out there for spend, especially as consumers have rationalized their dollars and moved a little bit more towards needs versus wants. So because of that, we've seen lower conversion rates as an industry. We've seen rising acquisition costs. So the fact that we've been able to pull that lever and increase average order value, it allows us to continue to push new consumer marketing geared dollars in a way that's still efficient for us as a brand, which is incredibly powerful for us.
Absolutely. And because you said your customers are so loyal and so sticky, when you're looking at how much can we afford to pay to acquire that customer for the first time, are you okay with having just a break even first order if necessary, because they're likely to return and order again? Or how do you kind of think about that approach when setting, the benchmarks?
I think it is something that we're increasingly talking about as a team, again, because we have that powerful retention engine. And we do know that even within a short period of time, we often see a consumer come back again and again. So it has not been something that Fracture has looked at historically, but as we kind of increase our analytical muscle, it's something that we're looking at more significantly. We definitely look at our lifetime value versus our CAC, don't get me wrong, but I think we've been geared, again, a little bit more on breaking even at least, or having a return on that first order versus kind of losing out. And that's something that we're continuing to watch, the consumer and their behavior and meeting them where they are, and just what our retention and LTV numbers or lifetime value numbers look like in order to continue to play in that sandbox.
That makes sense. And just for our listeners, if you heard CAC and you're like, what is that? customer acquisition cost, just another acronym. And you already kind of referenced the second notable result that you guys, got from this experiment, which was that 12 to 15% attachment of new and existing print orders having frames as part of the order. So on the life cycle, or maybe not the life cycle, the sales cycle, I should say, of the customer, did you notice a decrease in the amount of time from when someone first joined your ecosystem, whether it was following you on social or joining your email list, and the timeline between that moment and the moment of purchase? Did you see a decrease in the sales cycle because of adding frames, or was there anything else notable that you observed?
I don't think we necessarily saw a decrease in sales cycle immediately, but what we did see was the ability to convert some leads that we had been probably holding on to for a bit of time. So we also look at lead generation really closely as a brand, especially in this environment where sometimes there's a longer consideration period for products, or, you're touching people for the first time. So I think, again, in that period, and it was exemplified by the really strong attachment rates that we saw for new customers as well, we did see a slew of consumers convert who hadn't converted previously.
That's impressive. Are you able to give a ballpark estimate of what percentage of your list were those non-buyers that did become buyers because of this move?
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers probably handy to be able to kind of speak to, but I do know that we saw the trend there.
Okay. Awesome. And did this affect your return buyer rate too now having the frames available? Are you seeing a higher percentage come back and buy again versus what you had without the frames?
Yeah, so we're seeing pretty similar levels, which again, when I first came into the fracture business, I was blown away by our retention numbers and also our net promoter score, which is in the mid 80s, which is crazy for
Amazing.
a consumer brand. It's incredible. But what I would say about our existing or retention cohort is they're coming back with similar frequency, but they're purchasing more. So that engine, because of frames, is working a lot harder for us as a brand.
Right. So average order value just higher across the board, whether it's a first buy or returning buy.
Exactly.
And I'm glad you brought up Net Promoter Score because, some of our listeners are also building consumer brands. Others are in more traditional service-based businesses or digital products businesses and may not be as familiar with NPS. So can you tell, and I only actually really know about it because I used to work in healthcare and we had to survey our members on their, their Net Promoter Score of the healthcare plan. But I am curious, how do you guys administer that? Or can you share a little bit more about how that plays into your overall retention strategy for those who may not be familiar with what a Net Promoter Score is?
So a Net Promoter Score is basically a measure as you look and survey on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely you would be to recommend a brand, which I think is not just, hey, I'll buy it again, but I'll actually put, my reputation on the line and recommend this to a friend, a family member. So I think it's always a really good way. You usually take out like the really strong advocates and the really low detractors to kind of come up with the score itself, right? Which then gives you a measure for how high of a promotion level do you have from folks that you've had experienced the brand through a purchase, or if you're in the service industry through a contract or a client relationship, right? So we administer the survey post-purchase. We have a survey tool that allows us to do that. And our really fantastic customer support team actually looks at the data and monitors it really closely. I think what we've seen from a lot of our surveying, the two things that I think are really buoying our Net Promoter Score is, number one, the product. Really high quality, really loved by the consumer once they get it into their hand. And actually that customer service, customer support team, who we hear time and time again just how fantastic they are at making sure people's images look really perfect, or administering our happiness guarantee of, hey, if the coloring isn't quite right or you're not totally happy with your purchase, we'll make it right with a new print in your hand. So, we definitely have that team driving a lot of great interaction with the consumer, kind of learning and flagging anything from a service or product perspective or quality perspective that might be getting in the way of us maintaining that net promoter score so that we can quickly course correct. So I think they're actually both product and our customer service are kind of two elements of our secret sauce, I would say.
And I love, by the way, that you guys call it a happiness guarantee. I do remember seeing that on your website when I was perusing, shopping for frames earlier myself or frames and prints on Fracture. And I just love that you guys really kind of set the bar high from the get-go, like we're going to make this right for you and make sure that you are someone who wants to come back again and again. Do you know by chance the name of the actual software platform that you use to administer the Net Promoter Score in case anyone wants to implement it in their own business?
Yeah, I would have to check back, and Ellen, maybe I could shoot you a note afterwards
Yes.
of the one that we actually use, because I don't know off the top of my head.
Yes, that would be perfect. And if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, once Meredith sends that over, we'll make sure to include it in the show notes. So just check below and you can try it yourself if you're interested in doing something like that in your business. We talked a lot, obviously, about your key strength in your business being retention. And I'm just curious, is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet in our interview today that you feel like really moves the needle for you guys in terms of having and maintaining that strong retention?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, again, in a world where there's so many consumer brands that do manufacture overseas, and I've been part of some of those brands, the fact that we manufacture everything right in the US gives us a very high element of quality control. It allows us to move quickly when we see consumer feedback so that we're kind of always staying up to speed on things. So I do think that is a really great part of our company as well. It also allows us, even for a custom product, to get things into people's hands really, really quickly. Before I even joined Fracture's business, I experienced the brand the first time as a consumer, and I was blown away by how quickly I got a stack of custom prints to hand out to my friends and family. So, that kind of lead time element is definitely significant as well.
That's a great point. So I love that you guys are made in the US and that element for, some of our listeners who don't, produce physical products, and maybe, that piece isn't as relevant to their application. I'm wondering, how often do you contact your existing customers with some sort of offer or nudge or whatever it may be via email to come back to your website to purchase again? I love comparing how that frequency differs between consumer brands and other types of businesses.
Absolutely. So it's definitely several times a month in aggregate that we're reaching out with some of those different offers. We have a segmentation play, so we look at past customers that have engaged with us recently, who haven't, and sometimes we have differentiated offers or messaging to them. But usually most customers hear from us at least a couple times a month, which again, because our product specifically is a lot about capturing moments, we know that people are out there living a lot of life, right? So if you think about, the milestones of our consumer that maybe has kids that are going after school to school for their first day and has that on the front porch photo,
right.
Or holidays or sport photos or family gatherings. There's just a lot of milestones. So that definitely allows us as a business to reach out with a higher level of frequency. Again, also knowing that our products make such a fantastic gift, that means that they have more reasons to buy throughout a year. If I was sitting here as a CEO of a mattress company, which you buy on average every 10 years, would I think that was a little much? Probably, right?
Yeah.
But for us, that feels like we're meeting the consumer where they're at.
Yeah. And just again, such a great reminder in thinking through the types of products you create and sell in the first place. How consumable is it? And that is really impressive. I think about it like skincare, for example. Like you have to replenish it like every month or two when you run out of whatever your products that you're using. But to your point, yeah, there's so many built-in reasons to naturally reach out during holidays and major life milestones. So I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners, just to even think about looking at their products and what they sell. Like, how can you find those natural reasons to kind of bring your products and your brand back in front of the consumer's mind? So love that. And to wrap up our case study today, Meredith, now that this test of adding frames has been a huge success, Will you be adding new colors? And what other potential add-ons are you considering adding to continue to expand on what you've built here?
Great question. And we were just talking about, as a team, what does the future of merchandising for frames look like for Fracture? So I think you could see a little bit more from us there in 2025. Again, I think we've got what I'll call a great core commercial assortment. But we know that giving people kind of fun reasons to come back, engage with us as a brand, is super powerful. So definitely expect some eye candy there. As well, again, I've kind of very stealthily alluded to this upcoming launch, which I think is like a big category for us to enter. So that's our most exciting new add-on. Keep an eye out from what's to come from Fracture in early October, I would say, because we're super bullish about it as a team. It will include frames and be something that we feel like our both existing and new consumers will love.
So exciting. Well, I will definitely be keeping an eye out myself. And if I can make a selfish personal request for future colorways, unless it's already on there and I just missed it, gold, I think would be fabulous, because I love all of our frames in our home are typically gold. And so I'll just put in that personal request.
Yeah, I've got some gold frames from my pre-Fracture days of my family in our dining room. All of our kitchen has gold hardware in it, so it's like a really nice tie-in to that area. So I'm with you there.
Awesome. Food for thought. Then Meredith, where can our listeners continue to connect with you personally, as well as Fracture and everything that's happening in the next few months?
No, absolutely. I mean, our website is a great place to come. So fractureme.com, where you can sign up for either our email listserv or SMS, just to stay on top of most recent product launches, deals that we like to pepper in, especially around those consumer moments. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, at FractureMe, where we've got some really great content and testimonial from different influencers. But excited to engage with some of the listeners go forward.
Incredible. Well, all of those links will be below in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the video description. So make sure you check out Fracture. Thank you so much, Meredith, for joining us today and sharing, all about how you test new additions to a business and how that can really increase the lifetime value of your customers. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will catch you in next week's episode.